Welcome back to Salisbury, North Carolina. Today, we'll spend our time along the main line catching the typical weekday traffic in the area from a few different locations. So sit back and relax as we watch some action on the Norfolk Southern Charlotte North District. It's 5:45 in the morning here trackside, and the early morning sunlight has just started working its way across the sky. The ride to Salisbury was relatively quiet on the radio, but it wouldn't take long for the first sign of traffic to appear. The southbound departure signal from Salisbury Station has changed from clear to stop. This subtle change on the automatic signal reveals that the dispatcher has lined someone against this signal in the northbound direction up to control point Salisbury. In conjunction with the automatic signal falling, the dispatcher has also lined our first train through to the next control point at Spencer, eventually upgrading it again to a clear at both Salisbury and Spencer. The first train in question would be Amtrak 20, the Crescent, running on time into Salisbury. During the station stop, I jumped down to the opposite end of the station platform to catch the departing move as the Crescent creeps over the crossing at East Kerr Street. As the Crescent gets moving, the engineer gives a friendly tap of the horn. Salisbury is the first station stop on the journey for this crew as Amtrak 20 swaps out personnel in Charlotte, North Carolina before continuing its run north. This fresh crew would end up being held for NS 27A at Control Point Lee. The crews would then engage in some friendly banter to try to make some light out of NS holding them up.
20 look good too, Red.
Hi, 27A, we look at that.
I wouldn't have held you up, but NS likes to make trains so long the EOTs don't work.
If it ain't one thing, it's another out here, buddy.
That's right. Y'all hiring?
I don't know if it's any better.
Probably.
While Amtrak 20 and NS 27A were chatting, NS 12R began calling signals just south of Salisbury. Knowing they were close, I opted to get on the sunny side of the tracks at Control Point Spencer. This daily Columbia, South Carolina to Enola, Pennsylvania road freight is on its way into Linwood Yard, about 4 miles north of this location. As they approach, the crew contacts the Linwood trainmaster to get instructions before bringing the train into the yard limits.
About a whole yard.
Okay, let's get you in the inbound to Duke. Get you to that RTO1.
Inbound Duke, track 1.
With NS-12R and Amtrak 20 out of the way, and 27A swapping crews at Linwood, NS-P92 begins creeping down to the south end of O Yard. The conductor hops off the locomotive and removes the derail to allow the locomotive to slide through. Then, in accordance with the operating procedures of O Yard, he locks the derail back into place and rejoins his engineer in the cab to begin their journey down the AN line. Moving back down the main line to the Salisbury station, staying on the sunny side of the tracks, again this time for Amtrak 80. This plan quickly got turned on its head when NS-27A called the signals at 5 row. NS-27A, which was roughly 3 hours outside of its normal time slot, was running on track 1. With them being on track 1, I made the quick jump across the crossing to avoid being blocked by 27A during Amtrak 80's arrival.
Salisbury, 27A, yeah.
Of note on 27A today was a 3-month-old rebuild trailing second. NS-3998 is a former CEFX unit that was rebuilt by Wabtec and released in March of 2026. In the modern era of railroading, with engines becoming more and more similar, you have to take a moment and appreciate the little things that make each consist unique. While NS-27A's DPUs rolled through, Amtrak 80 quietly pulled into the station stop at Salisbury. Once in the station, Amtrak 80 would have to hold momentarily to wait for the signals at Spencer to show a diverging clear. This brief pause would give us a moment to listen to the classic P-42 AGP idle sound. next spot of the day is the signals known as 5 row. Situated at milepost 330.5, these intermediates help govern movements into and out of Linwood Yard and the Salisbury Y. By default, 5 row southbound signals show an approach. A keen eye will notice that track 2 is currently showing stop. It wouldn't be long until the daily Charlotte to Linwood shuttle, NSE 38, would appear around the curve to begin rolling downhill into Linwood Yard. NSE 38 was bringing in traffic bound for Linwood to be reclassified and Bellevue cars for NS 119. Once NSE 38 cleared up, I moved back to the bottom of O Yard. O Yard, or Old Yard, is the remaining portion of the former Southern Railway Spencer Shops and Yard. NS retains this yard to base 2 weekday locals, NSE 39 and NSP 92, allowing them to start their days out of the way of Linwood Yard operations. While NSE 39 continues dancing around in O Yard, the first Piedmont of the day begins to crest the hill. With no stop in Salisbury, Amtrak 71 wastes no time getting through on its way to Kannapolis and Charlotte. In between all the mainline traffic, an NS track inspector and Sperry truck make their way down towards the control point of Spencer. The NS inspector would pick up his high rail truck at the crossing and climb on with the Sperry inspection vehicle. They would begin working their way down through various crossovers and switches as they move down the AS line. With the track inspectors finally out of the way, NS E39 with an ex-Norfolk and Western caboose begins sliding its way out of O-Yard. This setup allows the conductor to ride along the rear of the train, using the caboose as a shoving platform for better visibility and stability while riding. This slow roll-by gives us a great chance to look at the cars bound for Taylor Clay that the crew had joked about earlier. The 3 black gondolas were less than 2 months old at the time of filming this, having been built in April of 2026. With the conductor protecting the shove, the engineer stops the train, applies 3-step protection, and dismounts to relock the derail at the south end of the yard. As NS E39 pulls past the signals at Spencer, NS E38 returns south from Linwood on its way back to Charlotte. NS E38 was rather light today, NS classifies its AC-44 C6M locomotives as Group 6 motors. This classification rates the C6M at 7,537 tons when traveling south from Linwood to Charlotte. In the northbound direction, the C6M gets rated at 6,098 tons. Most days, E38 runs with 2 Group 6 motors, meaning tonnage demand is up, but with today's consist, only the single unit was necessary. Once NS-E38 cleared the area, NS-E39 gets permission from the dispatcher to hold the main line on Track 1 to work the B11. B11 is the internal designation for the industry InnoSpec active chemicals located on the Old Buck Steam Station lead track in North Spencer. The 3 tank cars on the head end of the train will be dropped off and swapped out for outbound tank cars upon arrival. It would be about an hour until the next train appeared. NS-28N, hot Amazon and domestic intermodal traffic from Chicago, Illinois, bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. NS-28N seemed to have grabbed some foreign power out of the Chicago pool, as it would have a BNSF motor trailing second. Less than 10 minutes would pass until the first northbound Piedmont of the day arrived. Amtrak 72, with the same set as Amtrak 71, throttles up out of its station stop in Salisbury after skipping it earlier in the day as Amtrak 71. Moving west to the signals at Control Point Rowan, we find NSP61. This control point governs trains coming off the AS line wishing to proceed through the Salisbury Y and onto the main line. After P61's light engines cleared up, NSE39 was back again, this time to run the Y and get the train turned for the run south. We once again see the perks of NSE39 carrying the caboose on the rear, as the conductor rides to protect the shove movement through multiple crossings. NSE39 carrying a caboose isn't the only classic railroading action happening today. In the brief moment that E39 waits for a signal to proceed through the Y, the engineer places his lunch in the long hood of the locomotive. This trick is how crews have warmed their lunches for many years without microwaves. Who wouldn't want to cook on an SD40-2? One disadvantage to NS locals running the Y the way that they do is that during the pause to wait for a signal, the crossing gates will deactivate. This can often lead to rather close calls between motorists and the trains. Just out of sight to the right of the screen is the former location of Grimes Mill. This former rail-served industry was lost to a fire back in January of 2013, but some traces of the rail spur are still visible. We'll explore that and much more in a later video. With NS E39 gone for the time being, I shifted back to the main line in time to catch the next Piedmont of the day, Amtrak 73. Amtrak 73 would have CCU number 102 leading the way, while F59PH number 1984 shoves away on the rear. As Amtrak 73 was on approach, I heard NSP92 calling signals as they returned from the AN line. So as soon as Amtrak 73 rolled past, I jumped back to the AS line to catch the move off the Y and shove back through. NSP92 had a rather simple day. Since the train left this morning with just the engine, there were no drop-offs for the crew today and only a pickup. These hoppers, loaded with various stone types, come from the quarry in Gold Hill, North Carolina. We will see these hoppers again later in the day. Both NSP92 and NSE39 will often run the Y to complete their day. This allows the crews to shove their train into O-yard to drop off their cars. Once they cut away from the cars, they can slide the engine down and out of the way instead of running all the way to the north end of the yard and backing down to end their day. Now back north again at 5 Row for the outbound move of P61. Today, P61 would make a quick stop in O-yard to drop off a small cut of 3 cars, a rather light day for them. With NSP-61 stopping in O-Yard, I was able to catch them again as they finished up their drop-off. NSP-61 typically acts as a feeder to O-Yard, meaning that cars bound for any industry served by NSE-39 and NSP-92 will often be carried out of Linwood by NSP-61 and dropped for the locals. Later we will see how O-Yard sends cars back into Linwood for distribution. As P-61 backs down to couple up to the remainder of its train, the conductor rides on the rear locomotive to guide the engineer through the crossing. Once P-61 gets within half a car length of its train, the conductor dismounts and guides the engineer the last half a car to the couple. Since the conductor would have to lace the air hoses and do a quick brake test before rolling out the AS line, I was able to once again get in front of them at Control Point Rowan, this time opting for an elevated position. Up next was the typical meeting of Piedmonts. Amtrak 74 will be the first to appear in the area here at 5 Row, on its way to meet Amtrak 75 between control points Duke and Lee. Amtrak 74 and 75 will typically meet in the area between Lexington and Salisbury if they are both running on time, with 74 departing Salisbury at 3:01 and 75 departing at 3:11. Sticking around at 5 Row for the next pair of trains, this time it would be the pair of Atlanta originating intermodals, 24X and 28R. These two trains typically are spaced by about 4 hours on their journey north. However, 24X was running behind schedule today, allowing 28R to leapfrog them and be the first intermodal to appear. NS-28R had a splash of color today with NS-1072, the Illinois Terminal Heritage Unit, leading the way. It's always nice to see the Heritage fleet out and about, although it would be better if NS would give a few of them a bath every so often. Less than 15 minutes after 28R descended the 1% grade towards Linwood for a crew change, NS-24X followed suit on its way down the hill for its crew change. After the intermodals cleared up, NS E39, who had been holding its control point Sumner, reappeared in Spencer on its way to the north end of O Yard. As mentioned earlier in the video about NSP61 feeding O Yard, NS E39 will act as the shuttle to move cars from O Yard down into Linwood for classification and distribution. Since E39 will make a quick stop, I jumped down to 5 row to catch them once again. Catching them after working O Yard allows us to see what all they pulled from O Yard to bring into Linwood. Notice that E39 not only grabbed its cars from today, but also grabbed the rock hoppers brought in by P92 earlier in the day. These rock hoppers will later go out on NS12R later in the week. As I would leave for dinner, I could hear NS 154 on the radio approaching Salisbury. NS 154 would end up holding short of the East Monroe Street crossing for Amtrak 76 and 77 to slip by. Later in the night, we would see the counterpart of NS 154, NS 153, roll through Landis just after the late summer sunset on its way down towards Charlotte Yard. hope you enjoyed a typical day of action on the Charlotte North District. On screen now is the small list of trains that were unaccounted for in the daily lineup. The trains which are night runs are listed at the top of the screen, those which are daylight runs are listed at the bottom. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. I hope to have more projects coming out in the near future, along with videos and commentary for the upcoming North Carolina Transportation Museum America 250 celebration. Until next time, this is Alex London with Advanced Approach Productions, out.